The night was as dark as a raven's wing, the air thick with an eerie mist that clung to the surface of Lake Harriet like a shroud. I, Cyrus Kade, freelance investigative reporter extraordinaire, found myself standing at the edge of the water, my trusty tape recorder in hand. The gentle lapping of waves against the shore was the only sound breaking the oppressive silence. Lake Harriet, Minneapolis, I spoke into the device, my voice low and gravelly. A picturesque body of water by day, but as the sun sets, well, that's when things get interesting. I paused, letting the tension build. For weeks now, locals have been whispering about a ghostly apparition haunting these waters. A phantom ship, they say, appearing out of nowhere and vanishing just as quickly. But is it merely the product of overactive imaginations, or is there something more sinister at play? As if on cue, a distant foghorn echoed across the lake, sending a shiver down my spine. I've seen my fair share of the unexplained in my years as a reporter, but this might just take the cake. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. Tonight, I'm embarking on a journey to uncover the truth behind the ghost ship of Lake Harriet. And let me tell you, dear listener, I've got a feeling in my gut that this story is going to be one for the books. The next morning, I made my way to the Lake Harriet docks, where I'd arranged to meet with Captain Elias Blackwood, a retired naval officer who now ran tours around the lake. As I approached, I couldn't help but notice the way his weathered face seemed to mirror the craggy shoreline behind him. "Captain Blackwood," I called out, extending my hand. "Cyrus Kade," we spoke on the phone. The old sailor's grip was firm, his eyes sharp as he sized me up. "Aye, Mr. Kade. Come to chase ghosts, have you?" I chuckled, trying to mask my unease. "Something like that. I was hoping you might be able to shed some light on these sightings." Blackwood's expression darkened. "Light? Ha? There's precious little of that out there when the ghost ship appears. But come aboard, and I'll tell you what I know." As we set out onto the calm waters of Lake Harriet, the captain's voice took on a hushed, almost reverent tone. "It was about a month ago when I first saw it. A moonless night, much like the one you arrived on. I was just finishing up a late tour when the fog rolled in, thick as pea soup." He paused, his gaze distant, as if reliving the moment. "That's when I heard it, a creaking, groaning sound, like old timber straining against the waves. And then, there it was." I leaned in, my recorder capturing every word. "A massive ship, Mr. Kade, ancient by the look of it, sails torn and flapping in a wind I couldn't feel, and the crew." Blackwood shuddered visibly. Skeletal figures, moving about the deck. Their hollow eye sockets seemed to stare right through me. I felt a chill run down my spine despite the warm summer air. And then, just like that, it was gone. Vanished into the mist as if it had never been there at all. I cleared my throat, trying to maintain my professional demeanor. "Have you seen it since?" The captain nodded slowly. "Aye, a handful of times. Always at night, always when the fog's thick, and always accompanied by that bone-chilling wail." As if on cue, a mournful cry echoed across the water, causing both of us to start. "What was that?" I whispered, my heart racing. Blackwood's face had gone pale. "That, Mr. Kade, was the sound of the damned. The ghost ship. It's here." Through the swirling mist, a shape began to materialize. At first it was nothing more than a dark smudge on the horizon. But as we watched, transfixed, it grew more distinct. The ghost ship. It was exactly as Blackwood had described. A massive vessel that looked like it had sailed straight out of the 18th century. Tattered sails billowed in an unfelt wind, and spectral figures moved about the deck with an unnatural fluidity. "My God," I breathed, fumbling for my camera. "Are you seeing this, Captain?" But Blackwood didn't respond. When I turned to look at him, I found the old sailor frozen in place, his eyes wide with terror. The phantom ship drew closer, and I could now make out details that sent shivers down my spine. The wood of the hull was rotted and covered in a sickly green algae. Water poured from countless holes, yet the ship remained afloat. And the crew? I swallowed hard as I realized the captain hadn't been exaggerating. The figures on deck were indeed skeletal, their bony hands working the rigging with a grim determination. Suddenly, one of the spectral sailors turned and looked directly at me. Its hollow eye sockets seemed to bore into my soul, and I felt a wave of cold wash over me. That's when the screaming started. It began as a low moan, barely audible over the lapping of the waves. But it quickly grew in intensity, becoming a cacophony of agonized wails that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it did little to muffle the sound. Beside me, Captain Blackwood had fallen to his knees, his mouth open in a silent scream. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, the ghost ship began to fade. The horrifying sounds died away, leaving only the gentle lapping of waves against our boat. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I found my voice. "Captain, what just happened?" Blackwood slowly rose to his feet, his face ashen. "That, Mr. Kade, was a glimpse into hell itself. And mark my words, it won't be the last we see of it." In the days that followed, I threw myself into the investigation with a fervor that bordered on obsession. I interviewed dozens of witnesses, each with their own chilling account of the ghost ship. I pored over historical records, searching for any mention of a vessel lost on Lake Harriet. But the more I dug, the more questions arose. Why was this phantom ship appearing now, after centuries of the lake being ghost-free? And why did it seem to be growing bolder, appearing closer to shore with each sighting? I found myself spending long nights at the lake's edge, my camera at the ready, hoping to catch another glimpse of the spectral vessel. But it remained elusive, appearing only when I least expected it. One particularly foggy evening, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I rented a small motorboat and set out onto the lake, determined to get closer to the phenomenon. As I cut through the mist, the silence was oppressive. Even the usual nighttime sounds of the lake seemed muted, as if the very air was holding its breath in anticipation. That's when I saw it, a faint glow in the distance, growing stronger by the second. My heart raced as I realized I was about to have another encounter with the ghost ship. But as I drew closer, something felt off. The ship seemed less substantial than before, its edges blurring and shifting in a way that didn't quite match my memory. Suddenly, a burst of static filled the air, and the ghostly image flickered like a faulty television screen. For just a moment, I caught a glimpse of something beneath the spectral facade, something decidedly modern. Before I could process what I'd seen, a spotlight blazed to life, blinding me. A voice boomed out across the water. "This is the Minneapolis Police Department. Cut your engine and prepare to be boarded." As the police boat pulled alongside mine, I found myself face to face with a stern-looking officer. "Mr. Kade," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument, "I'm going to have to ask you to come with us." The next few hours were a blur of interrogation rooms and stern-faced officials. But as the night wore on, the truth began to emerge, a truth far stranger than any ghost story. The ghost ship, it turned out, was no phantom at all. It was an elaborate hologram created by a group of eco-activists determined to protect Lake Harriet from pollution and overdevelopment. "We never meant for it to go this far," explained Dr. Amelia Thornton, the lead scientist behind the project. "It was supposed to be a harmless way to draw attention to the lake's environmental issues, but when people started talking about ghosts..." She trailed off, looking sheepish. "We saw an opportunity to really make an impact, to create a legend that would make people think twice about harming the lake." As I listened to her explanation, I couldn't help but feel a mix of admiration for their ingenuity and frustration at being duped. But there was still one piece of the puzzle missing. "The screams," I said. "The wailing we heard. How did you manage that?" Dr. Thornton's expression grew serious. That wasn't us, Mr. Kade. We never included any audio elements in our projection." A chill ran down my spine as I realized the implications of her words. If the eco-activists hadn't created the sounds, where had they come from? In the weeks that followed, life around Lake Harriet seemed to return to normal. The ghost ship sightings ceased, and the eco-activists faced legal consequences for their deception. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something crucial. Late one night, unable to sleep, I found myself drawn back to the lake's edge. The water was calm, reflecting the starry sky above like a perfect mirror. As I stood there, lost in thought, a faint sound reached my ears. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but as it grew louder, I recognized it for what it was. The same bone-chilling wail we had heard on the night of the ghost ship's appearance. My blood ran cold as I realized the truth. The hologram may have been fake, but something very real and very terrifying was lurking beneath the surface of Lake Harriet. I watched in horror as the water began to churn, and a massive, otherworldly shape rose from the depths. This was no projection, no trick of light and sound. This was a creature beyond my wildest nightmares, awakened perhaps by the very technology meant to protect the lake. As the monstrous form loomed over me, its countless tentacles writhing in the air, I knew that my investigation had only scratched the surface of Lake Harriet's true secrets, and I feared that this revelation might be my last. The creature's maw gaped wide, filled with rows upon rows of razor-sharp teeth. In that moment, I realized that the eco-activists' well-intentioned deception had inadvertently awakened something ancient and malevolent, something that had been sleeping in the lake's murky depths for centuries. I turned to run, but my feet seemed rooted to the spot. The air grew thick with the stench of decay and brine as the monster's tentacles reached for me. In my final moments, I couldn't help but appreciate the irony. I had come seeking a ghost story, only to become part of one myself. As the creature's grip tightened around me, I managed to press record on my trusty tape recorder one last time. "This is Cyrus Kade," I gasped, reporting live from the shores of Lake Harriet. "If anyone finds this recording, run." The true horror of this place is far beyond anything we could have imagined. With a final, ear-splitting shriek, the monster pulled me into the inky black waters. The last thing I saw before the darkness claimed me was the twinkling lights of Minneapolis, oblivious to the terror that now called their beloved lake home. Months after my disappearance, a jogger found my waterlogged tape recorder washed up on the shore of Lake Harriet. The police dismissed my final recording as the ravings of an overworked journalist, perhaps suffering from hallucinations brought on by stress and lack of sleep. But there are those who know better. Captain Blackwood, who has since retired from giving tours, swears he can sometimes hear my voice on quiet nights, carried on the wind across the water. Dr. Thornton and her team of eco-activists have dedicated themselves to studying the lake, driven by guilt and a desperate need to understand what they might have awakened. And every so often, when the moon is dark and the fog rolls in thick, locals swear they can see something moving beneath the surface of Lake Harriet. Something massive, something ancient, something hungry. So if you find yourself on the shores of this seemingly peaceful lake, remember the tale of Cyrus Kade. And if you hear a strange wailing carried on the night air, don't dismiss it as mere wind or imagination. For in the depths of Lake Harriet, something waits. Something that was never meant to be disturbed, and it's always watching, always listening, always hungry for its next victim. In the years following my fateful encounter at Lake Harriet, the ripples of that night spread far beyond the shores of Minneapolis. What began as a local ghost story soon captured the imagination of the entire nation, spawning countless theories, investigations, and yes, even a few low-budget horror movies. Paranormal investigators flocked to the lake, armed with all manner of equipment designed to detect spectral activity. Cryptozoologists speculated wildly about what kind of creature could be lurking in the depths. Even the scientific community couldn't resist the allure of the mystery, with marine biologists and geologists conducting extensive studies of the lake and its surrounding area. But for all their efforts, no one could definitively explain the events of that night. The eco-activists' hologram technology was dismantled and studied, but it couldn't account for the sounds, the smells, or the very real sense of terror that had gripped those who witnessed the phenomenon. Captain Blackwood, once a skeptic, became a reluctant local celebrity. He was featured on countless podcasts and late-night radio shows, recounting his experiences with a mix of awe and lingering fear. "There are things in this world we're not meant to understand," he would often say. His voice heavy with the weight of his memories. And Lake Harriet? It's home to something beyond our comprehension. Dr. Thornton and her team faced legal consequences for their deception, but the notoriety of the case also brought attention to the very real environmental issues facing the lake. In a twist of irony, their misguided attempt at raising awareness ended up achieving its goal, albeit in a roundabout and unintended way. As for me, Cyrus Kade, well, my disappearance became the stuff of urban legend. Some claimed I had fabricated the whole thing as an elaborate hoax, perhaps as material for a book or movie deal. Others insisted I had stumbled upon something so terrifying that I had gone into hiding, afraid to reveal the full truth of what I had discovered. But those who knew me best, my fellow journalists, my sources, the people I had helped over the years, they knew I would never abandon a story. They kept my memory alive, continuing to investigate the Lake Harriet mystery in my absence. It was on the 5th anniversary of my disappearance that a team of expert divers, sponsored by a well-known documentary filmmaker, decided to plumb the depths of Lake Harriet. Armed with state-of-the-art equipment and a determination to uncover the truth, they descended into the murky waters. For hours, their cameras transmitted nothing but silt and the occasional fish. The expedition leader was just about to call it quits when one of the divers let out a startled cry. There, half buried in the lake bed, was a camera. My camera. As they carefully extracted it from the muck, a sense of excitement mixed with dread swept through the team. If the camera had survived all these years underwater, perhaps its memory card was still intact. Perhaps it held the key to unlocking the mystery of what had really happened that night. With trembling hands, they brought the camera to the surface and rushed it to a data recovery specialist. For days, they waited with bated breath as experts worked to salvage any information from the waterlogged device. And then, finally, a breakthrough. The specialist called the team in, his face pale and his hands shaking slightly as he queued up the recovered footage. "I've never seen anything like this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not sure I believe it myself, but well, you should see for yourselves." The room fell silent as the video began to play.
Thanks for joining us in the shadows tonight. If you enjoyed these chilling tales, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more spine-tingling stories every week. Have you got a story of your own? Share it in the comments below. We love hearing from you. And remember, the darkness holds many secrets. Are you brave enough to uncover them? Until next time, keep your lights on and your doors locked. Sweet nightmares.